I'm Kennedy, and I would like to welcome you to the Old Colonial Courthouse, the home of Tales of Cape Cod in beautiful, historic Barnstable Village. Before we get to tonight's presentation, I would like to give you a little preview about next week's program. On August 31st, we will have Marcia Belmonte Young, and she will present, "Oh, If These Walls Could Talk," the historic house museums of Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard. We will invite you to learn about these many house museums on Cape Cod and the islands. These historic properties range from first period houses built in the 1600s, all the way up to mansions built for high society. Some are well known and some are off the beaten path. The author loves visiting house museums and exploring the stories they tell. So please join us and she will share some of those stories with us. I would like to tell you also about a feature that we have, which is encore presentations. So if you like tonight's program, and I know you will, you might want to tell your friends about it, and they can log on to www.Tales of Cape Cod for a few days this week and see a presentation. There's also oldies but goodies, which are our past popular programs for $5. They include programs such as Greg Williams' popular programs, Crocker's Snows, Muskegon Island, and others. But tonight, we are very fortunate to welcome back to the Tales of Cape Cod podium, Marty Sandler, a national book winner for his book, 1919. Last year, he presented 1919 to Tales of Cape Cod. We knew it was going to be a great book. It is a great book, and it has won the National Book Award. Please save your questions until the end of the program, and we will have a small time for questions and answers at that time. Marty Sandler has won 5 Emmy Awards for his writing for television and is the author of more than 60 books, 2 of which have been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. He has taught American history and American studies at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and at Smith College, and he lives here on Cape Cod with his wonderful wife. Tonight, Mr. Sandler will talk about his newest book, Race Through the Skies. May I present Marty Sandler? Take it away, Marty.
Thank you, Ann. It's a delight to be here, and it's a delight to be in this gorgeous room, one of my favorite rooms on all of Cape Cod. Yes, I am going to talk about my newest book, which is called Racing Through the Skies. Let me introduce it. I can't think of any better way than to read a couple of lines from my introduction to the book, in which I say, it's difficult to imagine that little more than 100 years ago, the airplane did not exist, and very few Americans had ever traveled more than 25 miles from where they were born. Equally difficult to envision is that there was a time when flight was the greatest of adventures. At the heart of this book is the fascinating saga unto itself, the story of the most important week in aviation history, the Great Aviation Week at Rheims, during which the idea of the airplane became a practical fact and the age of aviation truly began. That it began and that has affected our lives in so many ways is unquestionably one of the most important stories in all of human history. A story filled with more than its share of improbabilities and magic. For as pioneer aviation legend Igor Sikorsky declared, and as this book reveals, aeronautics was neither an industry nor even a science. It was a miracle. So let's talk about this miracle. It begins, of course, with the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk in 1903, but not in the way my history teachers taught me, not in the way the history books I ever read wrote, because I start the book by, at the moment that after they fly, one of the Wright brothers named Lauren races down to the Dayton newspaper. And he tells the newspaper editor about, my God, you don't believe it. My brothers have flown. And the editor says, how long did they fly? And he says, 57 seconds. And the editor said, listen, if they had flown 57 minutes, we got a story. 57 seconds doesn't make it. He's probably holding in his hands the greatest story of the decade, but he doesn't know. Anyway, when his newspaper comes out, there's a story of a robber who's been pardoned, a story of Christmas sales at the department store, and a hitchhiker has been arrested, but not one word about the Wright brothers' flight. And actually, that's just the way Orville and Wilbur Wright wanted it. They didn't want anybody to know about that flight because they wanted to spend the next couple of years getting a patent on every part of that airplane, on perfecting it and getting patents on those so that they could build an airplane company that really prospered. So believe it or not, they just spend their time staying and staying silent. The people in Europe don't believe they've flown at all. And they stay silent and they keep working on that plane. And then 2 years later, on October 5th, 1905, they have completed the Flyer 2. And on a gray day, that Flyer takes off on October 5th, and it flies for an astounding 39.5 minutes. It travels 24 miles. Then, believe it or not, they do not fly for another 3 years. For 3 years, they just work on getting every one of the patents they possibly can get. They work on perfecting the plane. They come up with a warping system for the wings that enables it to turn faster and better than any plane that's ever taken off the ground. They actually, if you see the early pictures of the Wright brothers, you see them lying flat on the plane. They perfect the way to put in a seat so the pilot can sit upright. And they do that for the next 3 years. When I did the research for this book, one of the cartoons I enjoyed the most was a contemporary cartoon which shows the two Wright brothers looking up at the sky, and there's another airplane, and one of them says to the other, "Tell them to get out of our sky." That's how they felt about it. Anyway, when they had ready in 1908, they decide that Wilbur will go to France to put to rest all the doubts about whether they really did fly, and also to show what they can do. Orville decides to stay back in America, and to mainly because he wants to sell planes to the United States Army. If they can get the Army that has no aircraft to adopt the Wright Flyer, then they're well on their way to success in their company. So in 1908, Wilbur takes the ship to France. Orville packs up the Flyer piece by piece in crates and sends it over there. And Wilbur gets there. What he finds is there's only one person he meets who really believes he's flown. Fortunately, he's an engineer. He has a big factory and lots of mechanics, and he agrees that he will put the Flyer together for Wilbur. Once they get that together, they're ready to fly. And on August 8th, 1908, which is a terribly important day, I've always felt, as far as aviation is concerned, it's a more important date than the date than at Kitty Hawk. Anyway, Orville takes to the air. Now, there are thousands of people in that crowd waiting for him to crash. There are thousands of people hoping he won't even get into the air. Most of that crowd believes he's going to fly in a short, straight line for 55 seconds or so anyway. And what he does is he takes to the air. He only flies 2 minutes, but in those 2 minutes, he does loop-de-loops, he does figure eights. He not only lands, he lands within feet of where he took off. And the crowd bolts out of this racetrack grandstand where he's given this incredible demonstration, and they hoist him up on their shoulders. One of the newspapers the next day say, "We are children compared with the Wrights." Another says, "A new era in flight has commenced. This man is not a bluffer. He becomes an incredible, incredible hero." Meanwhile, back in the United States, Orville is succeeding in selling airplanes to the Army. He's almost done with his demonstrations when he decides to make one almost final great flight with the man who's become the serviceman who's become a champion of the Army buying the plane, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge. And so up they go. and they're almost completed with their flight when the wings of the plane fall off. Now, I got to tell you, these planes are made of paper and mache and spit and string, it seems. They're very, very fragile craft. Not to say anything about the inconsistency of their motors. Down it comes. Hundreds of people race to save Orville and Selfridge. Fortunately, they are able to pull Orville out of the plane. He's going to have a terrible limp for the rest of his life, but he will survive. Thomas Selfridge becomes the first casualty in the history of American aviation, of world aviation. He dies. But the whole business of Wright giving these demonstrations, there are people in that crowd who say, from now on, I want to be a pilot. There are people in that crowd that say, I must get him to give me lessons. He writes to his friends back home and to his family back home saying, almost nobody doesn't know me anymore. I can't walk anywhere without being mobbed. Well, one of the men who's in that crowd watching these flights is a man named Alfred Harnsworth. He's better known as Lord Northcliffe. He's the owner of the London Daily Mail, which is the most popular newspaper in London. But it's a newspaper that is changing the whole face of journalism around the world. Because Northcliffe has come up with this great idea. We're not going to do stuffy stories only. We're not going to do just politics. We're going to talk to the common people. We're going to give them the kind of stories they like. It catches on so much that newspapers around the country emulate it, but in the process, Northcliffe becomes an extraordinarily wealthy man. And he loves aviation. It's in its infancy. He sees a chance to be its earliest champion. He's a little nuts, and he's actually going to die in a mental institution. But he has enough wits about him to run the businesses, the newspapers, and he buys about 5 others and puts them all into solvency. And he certainly has the business to become the first great supporter of aviation. And he does it in a way that is going to change the way and develop the way aviation really rushes forward. What he does is that he offers a prize of $500,000 in today's money to any person who can fly across the Atlantic Ocean, across the English Channel, nonstop, either way. That's a lot of money. It's more money than any prize has ever been offered for anything. And it just attracts a tremendous number of people. But when they look into the challenges and what that means to fly across the English Channel, it's only 21 miles long. It rains all the time. It's foggy all the time. Look, no one has ever flown 20 miles across open water. And besides that, the wind never seems to stop. So in the end, there are only 2 serious contenders. One is a man named Hubert Latham. Hubert Latham, with an English name, is actually a Frenchman. And Hubert Latham is the darling of women all over the world. He's handsome, he's debonair, he's daring. Later on, some of the greatest experts in early aviation will say that he's probably the most talented pilot of them all. But anyway, Latham takes up the challenge. The other person to take up the challenge is a pure Frenchman named Louis Blériot. Louis Blériot is an engineer. He has made many inventions. One of his inventions has made him extraordinarily wealthy. He's the man who invents the headlights for automobiles. Anyway, they both set up camp on the shores on the French coast, waiting for the weather to clear, waiting to get the chance to take the risk to be the first person ever to fly across the English Channel. And on June 19th, 1909, Latham gets a jump on Blériot by taking off. And he flies about 7.5 miles very smoothly, and then his engine begins to cough. And then his engine begins to sputter. And then his engine dies. And Hubert Latham gets the unwanted honor of becoming the first human being ever to crash an airplane into the sea. But he's a pretty cool cat, is Hubert Latham, as the women fans know. And when 7 or 8 boats that are already in the harbor to watch his flight come to rescue him, Hubert Latham is sitting on his wing, smoking a cigar, happy as a clam. He puts on a hat with a pom-pom on top of it, and they take him back to France with him proclaiming profusely, "I will be back, I will be the first." But Blériot's not sure that's going to happen. And what Blériot is doing is waiting day by day, night by night for this weather to clear. On July 24th, only 5 days after Latham is pulled back, Latham goes to bed and he tells his mechanics and he tells his supporters, "Wake me up at 3:30. Let's take a look at what the weather's like at 3:30. They forget to wake him up. I think one of the longest times I spent in research on this book is wondering, is that really true? How could they not? But they didn't. They didn't do it deliberately. There was no saboteur. They just didn't. Meanwhile, at around 12 o'clock, Blériot is fully awake, and Blériot is looking out and seeing that the wind has died down, that the weather is clearing. Now, he's got to wait till 4 o'clock because the terms of the prize say that you got to fly between dawn and dusk. And at 4:41 that night, or that morning, that's when dawn came up. At 4:41, Blériot takes off. His airplane is not as good as Latham's, but there is one thing in it that's far better than anybody's. If there was anything that Blériot could do the best around aviation, is he could build motors. And even though his motor spews oil all over the open cockpit, and even though it spews gas all over the cockpit, it doesn't quit. He's sitting in an open plane, he's getting covered with the oil, he's getting covered with gasoline, but his motor, unlike Latham's motor, his motor keeps going. What he's not ready for is that as soon as he gets up in the air, he's totally ensconced in clouds and he can't see a thing. He's almost ready to turn back when the sky finally opens. Down below him is a ship that the French government has provided to guide him across the channel. He's doing so well that he doesn't follow it. He just goes past it. And then the clouds come again. And once again, he thinks he's doomed until the clouds open up again. And this time, he looks down and sees 2 big steamer boats heading for a port, obviously. What port could they be heading for so fast? It's got to be Dover. So he follows them into Dover. He doesn't land on the English shore. He crashes on the English shore. But as he says later, who cares? I made it. And indeed, he made it. He becomes the first real great hero after Wright of world aviation. He has conquered the English Channel. When he gets back to France, he is treated as one of the greatest heroes of all time. They send him to London where he gets every bit the same kind. And one of the newspapers proclaims something that is really true. It says, Louis Blériot is the first man in history to have shrunk time and distance. Another says it was as if that single flight had suddenly redrawn the map of the world. But wait, there's something else that the newspapers start to write. Because up to this time, with England and France perennial enemies, with other countries at war with each other often, all the defenses that have been put up have been against invasion by sea or invasion by land. For the first time in history, there's a whole new element. If man can fly across the English Channel, is it not possible that man will build planes strong enough to carry armaments and fly fast enough and far enough to attack us by air? A lot of the security that existed in that world before Louis Blériot flew has now disappeared. Anyway, there is such a sensation, it is such a sensation caused by this incredible flight that people in France, the only other country that's very intent on developing airplanes and aircraft. We have to understand, you have to understand, there were only about 46 pilots in the world at this time in 1908. There had never been an airplane flight in England. That's how primitive this all is. And yet, in France, in Rheims, the historic city of Rheims, where Joan of Arc crowned the king, where the great cathedral stands, where 3 miles north of it are the plains of Bethany, where some of the history's most famous battles have been fought. In Rheims, which is the champagne capital of the world, the champagne manufacturers see an opportunity. Let's put together the first international air meet. We're going to sell a hell of a lot of champagne if we make it so that it's a celebration as well as a meet. And so they get together and they sponsor it. It's sponsored by the champagne makers of the region. 38 pilots enter. Not Wilbur Wright. He wants to go home and just build up his company. But there's Blériot, and there's Latham, and there's Henry Farman, and there's a new man called Louis Paulhan, who is going to raise a lot of eyebrows. There's a man named Eugene Lefebvre, who before that 1 week or the 8 days of Rheims is over will be the 500,000 people who saw it hero. And there is one American, only one American entered. His name is Glenn Curtis. Eventually, he will become the most famous airplane maker in the world. At the time, he is the motorcycle racing champion of the world and holds many medals in automobile racing. But now he's here in Rheims to prove he can be the greatest air pilot in the world as well. Unlike the famous French pilots, he does not come with more than one airplane. He does not come with a whole portable kitchen. He does not come with scores of mechanics. He comes with one plane and limited replacement parts. He's not going to be able to take as many trial flights as the others. He's got to bank on that one plane and those parts he has and his own skill on winning the biggest races ever held in the world, including the Gordon Bennett Cup, which is the most famous and the most prestigious of them all. The people who put together, the people who are hired by the champagne manufacturers, have designed Rheims, or Bethany, the racing grounds of Rheims, to be a World Series and a World's Fair and a carnival and an educational center all at once. It becomes an incredible mini series. If I may read from the book again, as what will amount to, what will add up to more than 500,000, probably 750,000 people from every walk of life who will eventually come to one or more of these 8 days. As they come down the road, either by train or by automobile or so many by foot, they eventually come to a rise, and before them, much of their astonishment lay not only a flying course, but nothing less than a mini city. Spread out across the plain were 4 huge grandstands, public enclosures, and a long line of airplane hangars. There were also barber shops, beauty parlors, shoe shining shops, florists, telegraph offices, reception rooms, and a post office from which 50,000 postcards a day would be sent. The telephone installations were the biggest ever for a large event, with direct lines to Paris, London, Berlin, and Brussels. At the center of it all was a huge restaurant that could seat 600 diners at a time. Decorated with electric lights shaped like pearls, it was staffed by 50 cooks and 150 waiters who prepared and served over 2,000 lavish meals a day. Spectators would dine until 10 in the evening while listening to one of several operas. Scattered throughout the ground were bars that, before the meet was over, would serve 35,000 bottles of champagne. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary event. And before it is over, the whole world of aviation will be changed. I'm going to show you one picture. I wish I could show you a lot more. But this is the kind, I hope you're all seeing this. This is the kind of plane in which these guys are going to compete for 8 days. They're going to try to break the altitude record. They're going to try to break 3 different speed records. They're going to try to break the distance record. They are going to have major events that are going to change entirely the way the world thinks about them. I wish I had time. I wish I had time to describe this as I do in the book day by day, because it is filled with so many thrills, so many disappointments, so many humorous events. It's one, I know those of you who have heard me speak before, know that too many times I've told you that I used to have that card in front of my desk that said, you couldn't make that up. You could not make up Rheims and what takes place. Just to give you a recap of the events that took place. There was the Grand Prix de la Champagne. That is the race for distance. It's won by Henry Farman, one of the great early flyers of the day, and he flies 116 miles in 3 hours, 4 minutes, and shatters the record. There are 3 different kind of speed races. There is the Prix de la Vitesse, which is 3 circuits around the racing track. Glenn Curtis wins it. Latham comes in second. There is the Prix de Tour de Piste. That's in all of the 8 days. The winner will be the person who makes the fastest one circuit of that. Louis Blériot beats out Curtis for that. There is what is regarded as probably the second most important, second most prestigious race that takes place on the last day, the 8th day of this these events. It's called the Prix de la Latitude, and what it means, who can fly the highest. Before this, I would think the highest that anyone had flown is maybe 100 and 200. Hubert Latham gets his revenge for his terrible disappointment at the English Channel by flying 508 feet into the air. It's unheard of. People don't see him for about 3 hours after the meet because his fans had smothered him with kisses and carried him away. One other event that takes place on the last day is the Prix des Passagers, and that's for who can carry the most passengers in an airplane and stay up for at least 10 minutes. Showing you how primitive the time is. The winner is Henry Farman, who is the only one who can manage to carry 2 passengers for that length of time. But that's a big step forward. The most important event that takes place the next to last day is the Gordon Bennett Cup. Once again, it's funded by a newspaper publisher, Gordon Bennett, the publisher of the New York Herald. It's an event that will take place for the next 20 years. Every major air meet will have competition for the Gordon Bennett Cup. And this is the one that draws the most fans. It's estimated that 250,000, 250,000 people came just to see that race because they knew it was going to wind up with a contest between Curtis and Blériot. And of course, the crowd was immensely in favor of their hometown hero, Blériot. And what the Gordon Bennett Cup race existed of was 2 circuits around the track going as fast as they possibly could go. And the combination of the times would be they'd add up to 2 times. And whoever had the lowest is the winner of the most prestigious race. And Blériot goes first. And Blériot is a speed demon. And Blériot is being cheered. Hats are flying in the air as he completes in 15 minutes. He completes both circuits. And now it's Glenn Curtis's time to go. And he doesn't do all that great on the first circuit. But he decides as he comes around to try for the second time. If I die, I die, he tells people later. I'm going all out. And he sets a blistering pace in the second circuit, and he lands, but he's certain that he has not won until all of his fans race over to him. He has won the Gordon Bennett Cup by 6 seconds. He becomes the most famous pilot in the world. And it adds so much to all of the prestige that he needs to build the airplane company he will build. He will be the inventor of the seaplane eventually. He will be the man who puts together the first plane that ever flies across the Atlantic, although not nonstop. Glenn Curtis's name will become synonymous with early history. I must say something about Eugene Lefebvre. Eugene Lefebvre doesn't win any race. He comes in second in a couple, he comes in third and fourth in 2 others. But Eugene Lefebvre becomes the first stunt pilot in the history of aviation. Every day he goes up. Every day he dives straight down toward the grandstand and women faint. And every day he pulls out just in time. Every day he flies across the open fields almost with his wheels on the ground and then pulls up at the last minute. He does loop-de-loops in which he's absolutely certain to fail and die, and he pulls out of it. At the end of the meet, the founders of the meet give him a special award for being the most entertaining pilot. As an aside, I have to tell you that 2 weeks after the flight is over, he crashes at another meet and dies. And I should also tell you that of the 38 pilots who entered this meet, including some of the greatest of them all, 26 of them will die within the next month. That's what it was like. I mean, some of you, I'm sure, have with me enjoyed that movie a long time ago, the magnificent men in their flying machines. That's what I wanted to call this book, but I couldn't do it. But anyway, that's what this is really, what it's really all about. When the meet is over, and again, I apologize for not, well, you gotta buy the book. Buy the book and you will see all these great events. Anyway, or take it out of the library. But anyway, when the meet is over, the New York Times and the London Times say practically the same thing. They say, before Rheims, the practicality of flight was in doubt. After Rheims, it was an established fact. And it's true. So much so that in the next 3 or 4 years, things that were never, ever thought of as being possible take place. First of all, in 1910, there are 3 great air shows in America alone. In Los Angeles, the largest attended event in the history of Los Angeles takes place at the Los Angeles Air Show. The hero of the event of all, there are great things happen, but the hero is Louis Paulhan. Now, remember I told you that Latham had flown 508 feet in the air. Get this one. Paulhan wins the altitude event by flying 4,164 feet. That's how fast things start to develop after Rheims. There is the Boston-Harvard meet, co-sponsored by the city of Boston and Harvard University. And a new hero emerges. A new hero of aviation emerges on the scene, a man named Graham White. And Graham White wins 3 of the speed events. But another thing happens during the Harvard Belmont. Women from the beginning have taken part in some of these early races. And the greatest hero of them all, the greatest early hero of them all, is a woman named Harriet Quimby. She had a very successful career as a writer for fashion magazines back in 1906, 7, and 8. but she became the first great women's pilot. And she's performing at the Boston Harvard meet. And toward the end of the meet, the promoter says, "It would be such an honor for me, Miss Quimby, if you would take me for a flight over Quincy Harbor," which is where they are. And so up they go. And the crowd is throwing their hats in the air again and cheering Harriet Quimby and this promoter who has given them this great meet. And just as they start to descend, the wings fall off and both of them are thrown into the sea and Harriet Quimby dies. It's just such a matter of fact of early aviation. And still they keep coming back and they keep coming back and they keep going higher and faster and farther. That's what I wanted to call the book, but I couldn't do that either because somebody else used it. But anyway, following, the third great air show takes place at the Belmont Racetrack in 1910. And once again, Graham White wins all of the speed events. He's becoming very, very popular, and he's pretty damn good looking too. Immediately following that last air show, the first great plane-to-plane air race takes place over a great distance, not like the Bennett Cup that's around the track. And that is, once again, the Daily Mail puts up $500,000 to the person who can win a race between London and Manchester in England. And the two great contestants are Graham White, who's now become such a hero, and Louis Paulhan. And Graham White takes off first, and he's flying like heck, and then his engine conks out, and he has a terrible crash. And he has to take the plane all the way back to England, all the way back to London, I should say, to get it totally repaired. Meanwhile, Paulhan takes off. I'm abbreviating this because I'm getting late in my presentation. But he takes off. And as the word comes back to Graham White that Paulhan is getting pretty damn close to Manchester, Graham White does something that has never been done before in racing, in aviation racing. He takes off at night. And he actually succeeds in flying a lot of miles and gaining and gaining and gaining on Paulhan until his engine conks out and he crashes again. And so Paulhan wins the race. What I liked is I did the research and read all the newspapers today. When that little plane, that little speck appeared in the skies over Manchester, and the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, excuse me, who were waiting at the airport to see who would win, they didn't care. They didn't care. Could be Paulhan, could be Graham White. Somebody had done it. Somebody had flown that distance in such a fast period of time. I'll hurry along a little bit to just give you some of the other ones that took place. I got to get to my favorite one. But it's in the fall of 1910 that a Peruvian pilot named George Chavez crosses the Alps, who flies through this incredible pass at 13,000 feet. Can you imagine? And flies all the way to Italy, where there is a big air meet and where people are waiting to cheer him on as the highlight of that. And as he descends, his wings fall off. George Chavez dies. He doesn't die right away. He lingers for about 4 days, and on his deathbed, he becomes very famous by saying, just as he's dying, higher, higher, higher. This is a very, very different breed of men, these pilots. These are the men who lead us into the future. These are the men who lead us into aviation as we know it today. And they are fearless, and they are determined to win. My favorite story, well, there's another story that takes place, another race takes place. This is for you tennis fans out there. Those of you who love the French Open played at Roland Garros. I never knew who Roland Garros was until I went into this research. Roland Garros is one of the great, most daring pilots of his day. He not only becomes, at this time, inspired. He was at the race where Blériot, he was at the English Channel crossing. He was at that race. And as that race, he became so inspired that he decided he was going to try to cross the Mediterranean. And so he actually makes it. As he lands without 1 ounce of gas. I'm shortening that story. But I also have to tell you about Roland Garros that went in during World War II, when planes were used for the first 2 years only as observation planes, spying on the enemy, because they couldn't figure out a way to shoot the machine guns or the guns through the propeller. The first 50, 100 times they did it, they shot off their own propellers. Roland Garros was the man who invented a way, who came up with a way to synchronize the firing of the gun with the twirl of the propeller. And he revolutionized. He's the one who made the airplane. A weapon. Okay, so I get to the story I really want most to tell you. It is about my friend Cal Rogers. The Amor Company in 1911 puts out a new drink. It's a grape drink. It's called Vin Fizz. And they want to promote it in the most spectacular way they can. So they offer what today would amount to $1,300,000 to anybody who can fly from coast to coast. No one has even come close to that. In a month, in 30 days. And Cal Rogers takes up the challenge. Again, I'm running out of time. I want to leave some time for questions. So let me just tell you this. Cal Rogers gets in the plane. On his flight from where he starts off in upstate New York to the Pacific Ocean, he crashes 16 times. He has 50 forced landings. He breaks his arm. He breaks 2 legs. He takes 20 trips to the hospital before he climbs back in the plane. And for me, the most amazing statistic of all, when he finally lands in the Pacific, the only parts of that original plane left on that plane are 1 wing strut and 1 small part of a rudder. And yet, he does it. Unfortunately, he's 19 days late. The man who sponsored that flight was William Randolph Hearst, and he ain't gonna pay because it's 19 days late. No matter. Rogers feels he's done it, and to celebrate a month later, he's gonna fly around the Pacific Ocean and land again in the Pacific, and of course he crashes and dies. That's the story of this early aviation. But all we can do is have such give such incredible credit to these people. They opened up a whole new world. They opened up a world that anyone living at the time could never have imagined. And it certainly was a pleasure for me. It was a revelation for me to be able to do this kind of event. Let me say before I get any questions, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been a wonderful joy to be in this room again. Please, if you can, support the conservation and the preservation of this building, because it is truly not, I go around the country giving enough speeches to know it's not just a Cape Cod treasure, it's a national treasure. And thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Not yet. I can't read this. All right, I'm getting one that says, how many people did I have help me research this book? You're looking at the whole research staff. I do my own research because most of the time, this is an answer to another question that's come before us, and that is, how do you get your inspiration for new books? By doing my own research, I often come across stories that I say, hey, that would make a heck of a story, but I got to go back and do that. That's what led to one of my most popular books, The Resolute, when I was doing a book called Trapped in Ice, and I saw this little thing about references to this 85-man British Discovery ship that was abandoned and sailed on its own and became a ghost ship. And I said, man, I finally, through luck, and perseverance found that story. So I do that. Also, I don't have a research staff because, and I know there's good researchers out there, but I don't because so many times when I'm researching, I find something that turns, I'm doing a book right now. I'm doing a book right now on baseball with my son, which is a joy. And I did research like a month ago, which just set me to a place that turned the entire course of that book around. Now, a researcher, no matter how good they would be, could never do that. We get any more questions coming in? Yes. What is it?
I'll read it.
Yeah.
Did the Wright brothers ever get a government contract?
The question is, did the Wright brothers ever get a government contract? Yes, the Wright brothers got government contracts. They built the first military planes in the United States. They took incredible flights when they came back home. They to celebrate one incredible anniversary, they flew around the Statue of Liberty. There were millions of people in attendance. I debunk the fact that aviation, that's my personal opinion, that aviation started with that flight, because it really started, but it starts with them, and every bit of the acclaim they've ever gotten, they deserve. And they worked for years and years with kites and with gliders and with everything else to get us into this field. But aviation owes its beginnings not to just one man or one brother, it owes it to all these people I've talked about. And if you do buy the book or go to the library, you'll see that unfortunately I've left out a lot of stories and I've left out a lot of people, or I'd have you here till midnight, which wouldn't bother me. But anyway, thank you very, very much.
We got a couple more.
Oh, we got a couple more. Go ahead.
During your research, did you come across Eddie Rickenbacker, and is he mentioned in your book?
During the research, did I come across Eddie Rickenbacker, and is he mentioned in my book? I did come across Eddie Rickenbacker, but and I do mention him in the book. I've left out a whole chapter in talking to him. Tonight, did I say I would be talking to midnight, and that is the whole World War II, the time when I have told you that the airplane was used as an observation thing early on. And then when Garros invented the synchronization that allowed for shooting straight ahead, that changed the whole thing. But also World War I is the story of aces. It's the story of people who downed so many planes in combat, in open air, open cockpits. We all know the story of the dog. We've all seen movies about the dog fights. We all know about the Red Baron. Those stories are true. And I do talk about American air races. I'm sorry, somehow up in the balcony I got muted. All right, I have one last question. I have a lot more, but we really do have to wind it up. The last question I want to address is, somebody has asked, when does Lindbergh come on the scene? Well, that's another story I left out, and it's we've lost anybody or all of you, but
No,
they
you're
tell
there.
me that through technical difficulties I've been muted. Now I'm unmuted, and I'll answer one final question and try to stay muted.
Unmuted.
Or unmuted, and that is, where does Charles Lindbergh come into all of this? It's a great story, and it's really the story of two British pilots, one British pilot and one British navigator named Alcock and Brown, who came together after the war to go for a prize that had been offered by a newspaper for over $1 million. And the prize was for the first two pilots, the first tandem, that could fly across the Atlantic Ocean nonstop. Now, the dream of flying across the Atlantic Ocean was, for people back then, like the dream we had in my lifetime of somebody going to the moon. But by the time the war ends, they're ready to do it. They've developed enough technology during World War I, as far as aircraft is concerned, that they can do it. Maybe. And so 4 teams enter. And I've got to make this short. They all go to Newfoundland. The shortest route is to go from Newfoundland to Ireland. They all send their planes over to be unpacked in crates and dragged. The first two guys who take off crash on the runway as they're taking off on this field. The second two make it to over the Atlantic, and about 4 or 5 hours in, they crash into the Atlantic. And fortunately for them, there is a ship right there that gets to them and saves them. The third team never does take off. And the fourth team, Alcock and Brown, make this flight. And it's an extraordinary flight. And you'll have to buy the book to read it. But at one point, Brown, the navigator, they're in an open cockpit. It's freezing. It's snowing. He has to get out on the wing and chip away the ice 3 times during the flight. At one point, they dive straight down toward the sea. They're sure they're dead. And at the last minute, Alcock pulls the plane out of the dive. And they finally make it. When they make it to Ireland, they see this green field. They're so happy. They don't know it's a bog, and they crash into this bog, but they make it. And they become, 8 years before Lindbergh, the first two people. Now, they don't fly nonstop. I mean, they don't fly it alone. The way Lindbergh comes into it, the way I end the book, the last sentence in this book, is I say, when news gets out of what they've done, is probably the greatest feat that's ever taken place in aviation thus far. And back home in this little town, there is a 15-year-old boy, and he's reading about this, and he says to the people around him, I want to be a pilot. I want to do something even bigger than that. And his name is Charles Lindbergh. So I'll leave it with that, and thank you very much. I hope to see you again soon, and I hope I really see you this time. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you, Marty, thank you so much. That was excellent. That was so much fun. Now, if anybody out there would like to share this great event with others, please do. Tell them to go to www.talesofcapecod.org, and they can sign on for an encore presentation. Probably will be up tomorrow and will run until next Sunday. But Marty, thank you so much. We will have you again next year. Meanwhile, everybody, buy Race Through the Skies by Marty Sandler. And good night.